Netanyahu has his country on a path that cannot succeed. Not that may not that probably won't, but that cannot succeed. Israel is basically trying to solve a problem that needed a surgeon's scalpel. It have instead chosen to use like a 20-pound sledgehammer by killing so many people and literally destroying the entire infrastructure of the Gaza Strip and the 2.3 million people or thereabouts that are still alive in it. They can't even maintain life there. They can just exist right now. You will never be able to kill your way to success, and that is exactly what Netanyahu's trying to do.
The war in Gaza has reached a new level of destruction, and the path that Netanyahu is taking his country on has never been more dangerous for the long-term future of Israel. If you think I'm exaggerating, or this is really a war against Hamas, take a look at this video from an American doctor who just returned from Gaza and the horrifying truth he details to this reporter.
Quite literally, every day I was there, I saw a child shot in the head. That's not an accident. That's deliberate targeting of children for death. That's murder.
For the first time in modern history, 100% of an entire population is dependent on humanitarian need, food, and supplies for survival. We are less than 1 month away from the year anniversary of the horrifying October 7th attacks last year, but Netanyahu has still not secured his hostages. Countless times he has backed out of a ceasefire deal, and we are reaching a tipping point as a regional war amongst Israel's neighbors seems imminent. In today's video, I sit down with Colonel Danny Davis to discuss the reality of what's happening on the ground in Gaza, how the United States government is firmly involved in the continuation of this war, and finally, we discuss whether Donald Trump or Kamala Harris is best equipped to end this war. If you want the truth about Israel and Gaza, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
Well, everyone, once again, very honored to have Danny Davis here in the studio. And Danny, I want to talk to you about what I feel is really the biggest potential war threat, and that is certainly the Middle East right now. We're looking at Israel. We are looking at really a tipping point with Netanyahu, his leadership. There are protests going on in Israel. There's a tremendous amount of instability in that region. And again, we are looking at another forever war that the United States is firmly embedded in. Just give me your general thoughts right now as you're looking at this conflict in the Middle East, Israel, Hamas, Palestine, Gaza.
You know, I was reminded, pulled back up an old clip of a CNN interview I did in November of last year, so about a month into the war. And I very emphatically said at that time that Netanyahu has his country on a path that cannot succeed. Not that may not that probably won't, but that cannot succeed. Based on my personal experience of 4 total combat deployments, 3 of which were in counterinsurgency type environments here, he has committed his country to a political objective, which is the destruction of Hamas and bring peace and security to the people of Israel with military means in a way that is militarily unattainable, that he's not going to get it done. And it is played out in spades, exactly the way that I feared that it would, in that Israel is basically trying to solve a problem that needed a surgeon's scalpel. It have instead chosen to use like a 20-pound sledgehammer. And what that does is by killing so many people and literally destroying the entire infrastructure of the Gaza Strip and the 2.3 million people or thereabouts that are still alive in it, rendering them completely incapable of self-sustainment. And everything has been destroyed. They can't even maintain life there. They can just exist right now.
Right.
Now, what human being on the planet is going to be content living in that situation?
Right.
So you've gone in there and said Hamas was the terrorist enemy that launched the war on October 7th, and certainly that part is true, but the war didn't start on October 7th. It exploded then. It started decades before that, and even in the summer before the thing started, the Israeli Defense Forces had killed more than 200 Palestinians in all kinds of violence that had been going on, and it just turned it into a cauldron, which then exploded on October 7th. And so now then you have Netanyahu wanting to, quote, destroy Hamas by just killing just randomly tens of thousands, scores of thousands of innocent civilians as well. The official told somewhere over north of 40,000, but a British Lancet report came out a month or so ago, says it's probably closer to 200,000 when you count all the deaths attributable to the war. What do you think the people who are surviving so far are going to think when their their wives, their children, their mothers, their brothers, whatever, are killed, especially the men, by Israel. Whatever they may have thought of Hamas, if they weren't some of those reportedly 30,000 people that were fighters of Hamas, and they're being killed because Israel's coming in and just wiping out everything, who do you think they're going to be mad at? Hamas or the guys who pulled the trigger and dropped the bombs? Of course,
Right.
it's the latter. So you have now created so many more enemies than ever existed in Israel before that. And that's just within the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So there is more anger and hatred toward Israel now than ever existed on October 7th. So even if they're not called Hamas, and even if you kill the fighters who were wearing the green bandanas and whatever else they identified as Hamas, and you let's say that somehow you magically killed them all. Now then, all of their family members and all the men of the women and children and wives and mothers and daughters and sisters that have been killed are now hating Israel and want revenge. So they will definitely keep the resistance going up against Israel, especially all the people. Their entire way of life has been completely destroyed. I mean, you see those videos. They're just heartbreaking that you see every day of entire city blocks being turned to dust. And there's nothing that's functioning. I mean, the school system is non-existent. I mean, even electricity and water and sewer has been destroyed. There's no shops. There's no farming, no agriculture. There's nothing. Everything that they had used to sustain life has now either been just damaged or destroyed. And so the anger, the palpable anger that creates within Israel, now we're talking about, is just through the roof. So you will never be able to kill your way to success. And that is exactly what Netanyahu's trying to do. And of course, this has ripple effects in the region as well. As there's lots of hatred of Israel among, some of these violent extremist groups that have been kind of had their crosshairs on the United States, but now then they're willing to look elsewhere. You have the Houthis, of course, down in Yemen, and all the stuff that's happened with the Red Sea. You have Hezbollah and all that's being fired. You still are waiting to this day to find out what Iran's going to do because of the assassination of Hania in Tehran a month or so ago.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you see everything is just, the temperature keeps boiling higher and higher because of the course of action chosen by Benjamin Netanyahu. It will not bring peace to Israel. It will bring more instability and violence.
Yeah, Danny, thank you for the good overview there. And I think, the world is seeing that. I mean, the world is seeing that. This is something that, honestly, in my lifetime, I've never been able to just view so graphically. And I think what's also shifted so much in this, support is because of social media. These images are just so graphic and so available, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. And that is why there's a huge movement of youth support, really trying to say, wow, this is unbelievable, what is actually happening in Palestine. And I want to go actually to an event that happened earlier this week. I think this is actually quite remarkable because I think there's a lot of symbolism that, can be attributed to this. So we saw a presentation from Benjamin Netanyahu where, again, he's doing his job to kind of sell this war, saying that, we're going to end this battle. But he basically is pointing to a map of the region. And the only area of Palestine that is visible on this map is the Gaza area. The entire Western Bank is gone. And just basically non-existent on this map. Obviously, a lot of people are speculating, that was a very strategic move from Benjamin Netanyahu. He obviously was sending a message with that. Does that give us a kind of an indication of what he really wants to achieve here? Is it really just about annihilating Palestinians and eventually cleansing the area of all of them?
Well, you don't even have to look at that presentation you're talking about. Earlier this year, he said something in a speech, which I've used a few times on my show as graphic proof of where Netanyahu's mind is. Do you remember the big furor several months back to where when a lot of these protests were going on American campuses for, pro-Palestinians or whatever, they were being characterized as pro-Hamas or whatever. And there were a few Hamas, supporters of there because people are so mad about what Israel's doing. They're saying, yeah, you make Hamas look good or whatever. And some of them were making this mantra from the river to the sea that the Palestinian people want to clear all this stuff off. And people were going crazy and losing their minds in the United States about, oh my God, this is anti-Semitic in the biggest way.
Right.
Well, funny how a few months before that, I think it was January, if I'm not mistaken, Netanyahu was making a statement in his native tongue on his local media, and so not in the Western press in this particular case. And that was one of the times when Biden was trying to put pressure on him to get a negotiated settlement and to bring this war to an end. And he goes on there and says, hey, we're not going to do that. We will tell our friends, even our friends, no when we have to, and yes when we must. But listen, we are going to have security from the river to the sea. We're
Right.
going to have it all. There's not going to be any two-state solution, he went on to imply later on. But he expressly used that phrase, from the river to the sea. So
Right.
he already intends to wipe them all out, one way or the other. And
Right.
who knows what he's going to do. But when you see this methodical destruction of the way of life in the Gaza Strip, and now then you're seeing an increase in the physical attacks, military attacks in the West Bank as well. That's kind of lost in all the stuff that's been going on in the Gaza Strip. But over the last several weeks, that has risen up as well. And of course, we're still waiting to find out if anything explodes in the northern or southern Lebanon with Hezbollah. That was within an inch of turning into a war in a week or so ago, and we dodged that bullet so far.
Right.
But yeah, it appears that Netanyahu, if you just look at this honestly and you just make an assessment, not about what anybody says, though sometimes what they say does count, but you look at what they do, and you see Netanyahu has methodically destroyed the ability of this population to exist here. He's now starting to do the same with the 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank. He continues to talk about going after Hezbollah, and he keeps making these incredibly illegal and provocative actions against Iran. It looks like that he wants to solve all these problems militarily, and he wants to draw the United States in to do it because he doesn't have the military capability to literally wipe out all these people to defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon and to defeat Israel. He doesn't have the capacity.
That's
but
right.
with America, he thinks maybe he will. So I think he wants to start a war based on the evidence that he's trying to spawn a war there and get us sucked in so that we don't have a choice and we have to respond and go into a war. And then even if it caused, the whole world to hate him, he's thinking, if we solve all these problems militarily, then there'll be a future and we can all live in peace. Israelis, can all live in peace without the Arabs or any of these threats. It's irrational. It's insane. It will never happen, but it appears that he thinks it will, and he's trying to make it so.
Right. I mean, it's definitely, there's no way that Israel would survive even up to this point without U.S. military support. I mean, we very much have supported Israel over the years, selling them billions upon billions of weapons. I mean, we are their security partner and, have basically guaranteed their existence. So, I mean, I think we're really caught in a hard place because, the United States, again, goes beyond party lines. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. Every politician in the United States, generally speaking, will always stand firmly in support of Israel. But I think there's another really interesting article that just dropped here, and this is actually fascinating. I'm going to put the link to this article because if you haven't read this, I want you to. It's from dropsitenews.com, and it says how the U.S. enabled Netanyahu to sabotage a Gaza ceasefire. And I think the big takeaway from here, Netanyahu is not caring for these hostages at all. I mean, it's been far too long. I mean, we're coming up to, we're only 1 month away from a 1-year anniversary of this, tragic October 7th tragedy that, of course, was horrible. It just does not seem that hostages is Netanyahu's priority. And this article really lays that out. It really lays that the fact that he has neglected the hostages, it really is more about him having his war as opposed to making the best decisions for his country. You're starting to see a tremendous amount of backlash in, Israel, with the Israelis taking to the streets, protesting, asking for a ceasefire. And, now, you can see, how the United States has enabled him to do that because we don't have leverage over Netanyahu. In many ways, he wears the pants in this relationship, if you will, or he certainly controls Congress and the way that they dictate the future of American politics very firmly.
There was an interview on Fox and Friends on Thursday morning of this week where Netanyahu was interviewed, and they were asking him some of the issues about. Of course, Fox is almost always against anything on the Democratic Party, so I think the way the question was phrased by the anchor was, is Biden making it harder on you to reach a ceasefire, and by putting all this pressure on you? And he said something that Netanyahu did that was very, I think, illustrative of where he is, where his mind is on this, because he said, if we had a ceasefire and if we withdrew our troops from some of this place before, people say, well, then if it doesn't work out or whatever, then you can just go back in. He said, but it is so much more difficult politically and diplomatically and every other way to go back in later. He said, we went out of, southern Lebanon in 2006, and you see, we never went back in there. He's given an indication that he thinks, no, if I have a ceasefire, it'll be hard to go back to war later. It'll be
Right.
much more difficult because once the ceasefire happens, the overwhelming global public pressure will be to solidify that and turn it into some kind of stability. Well, I
Right.
won't say peace because I don't think that's possible for the foreseeable future.
Correct.
But he doesn't want to do that. All these people in Israel have been, protesting, ironically, not because they think he's being too hard on Palestine, but just because they say, just do a damn deal and get our people back.
Right.
Then you can do whatever you want to do. It's interesting that many of them have that view.
Right.
But I've been saying this also from like the first month of the war. If Netanyahu wanted those hostages back, he could have had them back. Even if you paid 10 to 1, 20 to 1 Palestinian prisoners for every one Israeli, they could have had a deal.
Right.
The Hamas side was asking for an exorbitant amount, and I don't think it was as high as 20 to 1, but it was very high, and you could have had them. In fact, they were willing at first to say all of the civilian hostages we can return for these Palestinian prisoners if you get them back. And I made the comment at the time. I said, what does it matter to Israel? Get them. Give them whatever they want. Where are these people going to go? They're going to go in the Gaza Strip, where you've got the whole thing sealed off. So it's not going to make any difference whether you release those prisoners back there or not, because you've already got the thing sealed off and your war would continue on. You would just make this prisoner swap, basically. And he wouldn't do it.
Right.
He wouldn't make any of those deals. And now also on that same Fox and Friends interview Thursday, he again, of course, blamed everything on Hamas, so that we keep saying yes and they keep saying no, which is just factually inaccurate. It's just an outright blatant lie,
Right.
because Israel is not just saying yes. In fact, they're saying no to everything. And anytime Hamas, who has been overt about wanting a ceasefire, he keeps putting in, changing the terms and changing the deal in ways that he knows that they're not going to say yes to, instead of just doing whatever it takes. And that's why the Israeli people, now, this is not me or America. This is the Israeli people see the same thing. And that's why they are absolutely furious, because they're thinking, you could get our people back. Just do whatever it takes, get the people back. And then if you want to go back and fight, so be it.
Right.
But Netanyahu doesn't want to. He doesn't want to risk losing the ability to wage war. And I think that's the truth of it.
That's a good analysis there, Danny. And I really do believe in his mind and his heart, he's willing to sacrifice those hostages in exchange for his ability to have this war. And what he feels, this is really his defiant moment. This is going to define his career as a politician. And obviously, one of the things we have to always bring up is the fact that he was wanted on corruption charges and really faced almost an impeachment trial, and so, he was very much potentially going to lose his spot as president. Of course, when a war happens, then everything's off the table. Now he's the leader. And again, he was the big security guy that was really going to, make sure that Israel was always secure. So, that's something that, I interviewed Colonel Douglas McGregor. We talked about the fact that, Israel is just so ironclad with that security. Very unusual that even this event was even able to happen on October 7th. And, a lot of people are starting to speculate on that as well, have been speculating for a long time. But I want to go to a little bit different direction here, but, kind of similar is Senator Tom Cotton. He came out and said that he basically still calls for Israel to, quote, finish the job. And, and against its war with Hamas. I guess, that's music to Netanyahu's ears, is when you have, U.S. senators, again, blindly just supporting this war, these atrocities. And, I think what is so sad is, we've just seen the incredible amount of children that have been killed. And it's just a tragedy. I played a video from a Harvard professor that went there, and he said, I've never seen so many, gunshot wounds to the head. And this is not an accident. This is systematic killing of people. And, that doesn't happen. That's not an accident. By every day I'm seeing children brought in and they're just shot in the head. And that's just a very sad thing to hear. That is unfortunately the reality of what we have to do here, is we have to cover wars and the truth of what's actually happening. But what do you make of it when you hear Senator Tom Cotton say, finish the job?
Well, I just think it just goes back to the horrific lack of understanding of how war works. So I get it that you love Israel, Senator Cotton, and many people like him, and you want them to win. You want them to be secure. Ironically, I care a great deal about the Israeli people. I care a lot about wanting them to be able to live in peace without worrying about rockets falling on their head or buses getting blown up by terrorists, etc. I want them to. But simultaneously, I want the Palestinian people to have the same capability. Yeah. I want them to have a chance to live without worrying about an occupying army coming in their night and taking all of their family members away and executing some and making others disappear. My argument has been from the outset and remains firmly to this moment, if both Israel and Palestine do not have the possibility of having a future and a hope and even the possibility of peace, then neither is going to have it. It can't just be the Israeli side. Tom Cotton wants it to just be the Israeli side. He wants them to have peace and frankly doesn't care about the Palestinian people. Well, it doesn't matter. Even if you're just a cold-hearted person and have no thoughts and no feelings in your soul, and you don't care about the Palestinian people, if they don't have a hope, then your favored community here, the Israeli civilians, are also not going to have a success. They won't have peace. They will always have the risk of rockets falling on their head or buses blown up or other terrorist strikes, because no human being on the planet, no matter what their ethnicity or anything else, no one is going to be satisfied. They will all demand some kind of ability to just have a normal life. And that's all that anybody's really asking for. And for people like Tom Cotton to say, quote, finish the job means he has no bloody idea how things work, because there is no finish the job short of ethnic cleansing and wiping out all the people or expelling them from the land somehow and literally erasing them from the equation. And of course, that has its own consequence. And so it still wouldn't work. Ergo, what he thinks of as finished a job doesn't exist.
Danny, I've got one final question, and this is an interesting one because on Twitter a few weeks ago, the American Israeli Public Affairs Commission just celebrated their fundraising, the fact that they had donated over $100 million to politicians in the United States, this year alone. And, that's kind of an ironic thing to be celebrating because, one of the critical things that I think of our government, unfortunately, is the fact that we've essentially legalized corruption, because we have so many public interest groups and we have so many specialty groups that are, can donate to politicians. We have lobbyists. I mean, we basically just legalized corruption. And of course, as you know, to be an elected public official in the United States, you need a tremendous amount of money. Hence why the gun companies are very much, supporting candidates. You've got the Israeli lobby that's very much has a firm control. But now we're shifting to the U.S. election because we're less than 2 months away from the 2024 election. Again, we've got a choice between Trump and Kamala Harris. But, who in your opinion is better equipped to handle this war? Because I think in many ways, Joe Biden had a lot of pressure on him because many people felt that, he was not doing enough to support Palestine. But on the flip side, I think Donald Trump would even be more pro-Israel. I mean, is it really just two sides of the same coin?
I think I previously said that when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, there's this pretty significant difference between the two candidates. But when it comes to the Israeli-Hamas Middle Eastern issue, there's not a lot of daylight. There may not be any daylight between them because both of them, frankly, really benefit a lot from a lot of the Israeli lobby money, and they are intentionally doing that. You've seen them, this Israeli, so-called Israeli lobby has been quite open about how much they have injected themselves into the American political system, and they make good on their threats that either you toe the line for the Israeli side or you will pay the price with your job. And we've seen 2 Democratic members of the House of Representatives be defeated in primary campaigns this season so far because they did not toe the line. And they were talking about the Palestinian people. I want to say it was 8 million or something, 5 to 8 million in one race. And some other number of million in the other race, and it was the difference making between. So that reverberates across the entire political spectrum. And it, again, like you said, it doesn't make any difference. Republican, Democrat, they could care less. All they care about is you have to have a reflexive, total pro-Israeli view, or you will be targeted and you will be defeated. You will lose your job. When you're running for president, especially, and this goes especially for senates as well, because of the large numbers of dollars you have to raise. Right. They don't want to risk any of that. And so that's why if they've given $100 million so far, who knows what it's going to be in the final. But you see, they'll probably evenly split it between the two. All they care about is that the candidates don't say anything negative about Israel. And so far, I haven't seen them do that.
I think if any politician in the United States, if they certainly take a more pro-Palestinian voice, then they're definitely going to be at a very high risk of losing their political career. So again, one of the fallacies of our system, unfortunately, is that these politicians rely so much on, funding and getting that money, because it is very, need a lot of money to become elected.
Yeah, we talk about free speech all the time. I don't have any advertisers on my show, or so we just put out a show. You either watch it or you don't. So I'm free to say anything that I want to, and I'm saying here, I think this is morally right, and I think that this, this thing over here, this is working against the Israeli side. So I can be completely open and honest about what I want. There's some people don't like that, and they'll yell at me or whatever, but That's
Right.
free speech. You have the freedom to do that. But when it comes to money, if me being on the air depended on how much money I had, and then these interests who have the money, they will have some influence over what they say, or I could get shut down. And
Right.
that's how it's working in the politicians issue, because now then, man, you don't get to say what you think, or you will pay a price, and they'll shut you down. Even, but as you say, I think it's called, legal bribery. They can do that, and that's what money does, and that's our system is just it's rotten.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Danny, I want to thank you so much again for your time, and everybody, make sure that you check out Danny's amazing YouTube channel. He does some incredible interviews. Always very honored to have you on our show here, Danny. And thank you so much. We're going to put your video information, to your YouTube channel. We'll put that all down in the links down below. And thank you so much for joining here, and we will see you in another interview soon.
Always appreciate it, Cyrus. Thanks so much.